it's 4 a.m. Excuse me for being tired. It's 4 a.m. and I'm still reading fanfics to you guys after almost 10 hours of doing this stuff. And I was in an hour before, so it's almost been 11 hours for me doing this. So don't complain. Well, the live stream is online again. We're gonna read A Visit by Emerald Flight. And it's a sad, romance, tragic, dark story, slice of life. It's by it's got 2,600 words. The description is: a visit from a loved one is a fantastic thing, especially if you haven't seen them in a while. It's nice to just kick back and talk for hours on end before wrapping up with a joke and a hug. Not in all cases, though. And yeah, it's got a little review right there, but I'm not gonna read that. So here we go. A Visit by Emerald Flight. A pair of lavender eyes opened slowly to the darkness. Every night for the past 3 weeks, she had awoken from a sleepless dream. From a dreamless sleep early. She was still angry at herself. Not that she knew why. Maybe it was because she was still blaming herself. Maybe it was because she didn't allow herself any emotion during the wake. Maybe it was because she hadn't spoken to nearly any pony since it happened. She blinked, shadows overtaking shadows and forming a lightless pool of black in front of her. It was early, she was tired, and she was analyzing herself. Again, stupid brain, just shut up. The moonlight streaming through the window revealed the way she'd been living recently. Books, mostly coping and self-help, were thrown carelessly, spines broken, and pages bent in corners of the room. Beyond that, the dim bluish glow cast a light on everything from the pace-worn, tattered astrology carpet to the dust floating through the air. She sighed, winching as she heard her voice crack. She could feel the tears already pooling behind her eyes, but she shook her head, levitating her pillow over to herself and pressing it against her face. She swore to herself she swore to herself to follow the will. She swore to herself. It'd been long enough since the accident. 3 weeks, that was long enough to stop the tears at least. A sudden, frightening warmth ran through Twilight's body, softer than a hot flash, but it had an edge of ice. Twilight's heart skipped 2 beats. Where did the darkness go? Her breathing became shallow. The room was filled with a dull glow, and a quiet buzzing bounced around her brain, and it seemed to be emanating from right behind her. She shuddered as another flash of warmth ran through her body. Eyes shifting around the now illuminated room, she could sense some pony. Something else in the room with her. Another short breath. Against all better judgment, she shifted her body to the left. Emotions violently clashed in her mind, very violently. Fright and worry and confusion, and a peaceful sense of familiarity were all in metaphorical battle. The only thing she could do was... Her thoughts were interrupted by a slightly translucent pink hoof pressing quickly against her lips, buzzing faintly as she did so. Don't scream! It must have been minutes, but it felt like hours. Then again, even minutes had such in such a terrifyingly odd situation could make any average mare's heart burst. Twilight felt tears, frightened, surprised tears, surface again before her guest took its hoof off her lips. Now, you're not gonna scream, right? Twilight shook her head silently, her pupils pinpricks by this point. Her mind calmed her down just enough for her to get a sentient thought across. How? The entity giggled. Her voice sounded detached, distant. That's not the point, Twily. A forced chuckle escaped Twilight's lips. Her nickname, coming from the unearthly being before her, though, made her feel all kinds of burning emotions. She reached a shaky hoof up to her visitor's cheek. It felt normal, but there was an electric quality to it, as though she had as though she had comprised of nothing but lightning. You can't. It doesn't make any... She trailed off into mutters, but still shaking badly. Another giggle echoed throughout the room, and Twilight retracted her hoofs quickly in surprise. But I'm here! Well, kinda. Look, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Don't be scared, Twily. Just be. The disembodied voice drowned out as another thought clicked in Twilight's mind. Once in a lifetime. Without realizing fully what she was doing, she leaned forward to embrace the half-visible pink mare, sobbing as she did so. How did... I don't... Why would you? How could you? She stuttered, taking every bit of comfort as she could in the slight warmth of the embrace. She heard the detached voice echo throughout the room. Shh, I know. It was comforting in the strangest way. Pinky, how could you? Why did you leave me like this? Twilight continued, her voice raising in volume. You couldn't have died, you couldn't have! She inhaled, shuddering. I loved you! Sorry, Pinky. I'm sorry, Pinkie Pie's voice whispered. If I had the choice, you know I'd spend my life here in Ponyville with you. But you didn't have a choice, Twilight shouted, pulling away and sitting up. You didn't! It was my fault! Twilight gasped. There was a moment or two of near silence, save for the gasps and sobs and the buzzing echo around the room. No, she said firmly, and after a few moments, please don't blame yourself, Twily. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't any pony's. It was my fault! Twilight shouted again, tears streaming down her face. I was right there! I was in the next room! She choked on her words, her shout breaking down into whispers. I remember everything, Pinky. I remember the blood. Images flew into her mind momentarily, images she had never wanted to see again. I could have stopped it. I could have. She stopped, leaning again into a deep hug. The sadness in her slowly began to lose its intensity as she felt such a familiar mare between her forelegs once again. But then her cheeks displayed her grief. Not anymore, though. Every sob that was now racked by her body was emotionless, just as the feeling of being close to Pinky. The Pinky she had known was gone, made her head feel light and her heart ache. I remember it too, Pinky's voice whispered. Twilight could feel the warmth of her breath on her ear. I remember right after it happened, Twily. A sniffle. I could see you. You were crying, I think, shouting something. She grasped Twilight tighter as she heard a staccato breath. I didn't want that, Twi. Neither did you. It was just a normal kitchen accident. It could have happened to any pony. But it happened to you, Twilight whispered back, and the sadness returned full force. A fresh wave of tears came to her. She remained crying into the entity's shoulder for, well, hours. No matter how long it was, though, it would never be long enough. The moon vanished slowly from sight as the new brightness returned to the black sky blue. Twilight had drifted in and out of sleep, taken into a state of total peace by her visitor. Her eyes snapped open before she felt the day returning. She pulled away from the sleepy embrace. Pinky, she whispered, staring into the blue eyes she knew still all too well. Does this mean you're staying here? She spoke with hope, even though she could feel the answer already. It was too long of a stretch. Pinky smiled sadly, her body shifting colors momentarily in a haze of static. I wish I could. Twilight sniffled and nodded quietly. I guessed so. I don't want you to go. Her voice broke, but she steeled herself and continued. I don't want you to leave again. I want you to stay with me, please. She took a shuddered breath, a few tears falling down her cheeks. I love you. Pinky raised a hoof towards Twilight's face and gently wiped away the tears. I'm sorry, Twi, but I can't. It's just not possible, she whispered, her own staticky eyes visibly tearing up. Pinky moved her head forward slowly, catching Twilight in a soft kiss. Twilight's heart was on fire, her horn began glowing a light pink as a tingle ran up her spine. Why can't this go on forever? Of course it couldn't. Pinky pulled away with a quiet buzz, her eyes half closed. She bruised a few loose strands of hair out of Twilight's face with a slowly dimming hoof. I want you to look into the second drawer of the chest next to my bed. She nuzzled her cheek. I love you too, Twilight. Twilight looked helplessly as every cell of the pink mare's body, already having a seamlessly loose grasp in reality, dissolved as though blown away by the wind. She made a helpless grasp for the pink wisps sweeping away from her, before bringing her hoof back to her mouth in an attempt to comfort herself. The sun finally rose less than 10 minutes later, but before that, the library was missing its librarian. It was probably only luck that Applejack's harvest has taken her to the gates of the acres at a certain time early that morning. In a minute less or a minute more, and she wouldn't have had the chance to see her friend galloping through the adjacent street, a small object held close to her chest in a warm pink glow. Applejack's eyes followed Twilight down the street as a flurry of tired thoughts swam through her mind. Twilight seemed awfully upset galloping at that pace, and so early in the morning too. Well, she's been upset since the incident. We all have. She looked hazily down the street. Now, where could she be heading at this time of hour? All that's down there past the city limits is the lake and the cliffs. Applejack gasped, assuming the worst. Her pulse jumped and all her thoughts of sleep were driven violently out of her mind as she abandoned her apple cart, leapt over the fence, and took off after quickly retreating to the purple mare. As the quiet street filled with the sound of hoof on cobblestone, Applejack quickly went over everything. In the end, of course she was being drastic. Of course there was another reason Twilight could be heading out of town this early in the morning, but none came to mind, and therefore she couldn't afford to take chances. Applejack may have been faster physically, but apparently Twilight was fueled by something beyond sugars and proteins. Applejack had just passed the city limits, panting and sweating, when she heard another pony's panting. They were still a good 2 miles from the cliff. If that was Twilight, what had she stopped for? Applejack quickly looked around to see at the lightly forested surroundings. She could see various buildings from Ponyville behind her, but everything else was only partially familiar. There was the sound of a nearby stream and, of course, the panting of her absent friend. She took a few cautious steps through the brush before she realized with a terrible pang of compassion that what exactly Twilight had left Ponyville for. Through a latticework of shadows, Applejack could see her friend standing in a small corner of Oakfield Memorial Graveyard. He stood by, a hoof to her mouth, as the scene unfolded in front of her. Twilight's heart was burning. She wasn't sure whether it was from her extraordinarily long gallop or just from the sleepless, emotion-filled night. It didn't matter. She looked down at the granite headstone, a scowl on her face. Keep calm and cupcakes, the epitaph read. Pinkamena Diane Pie, 60296054, CR. The bestest friend to all. Even if you had kept things light-hearted in your death. You even had to keep things light-hearted in your death, didn't you? Twilight thought bitterly. It's almost cruel. She looked down at the ground below her, plastered with wilted petals and the rotting gifts of the entire population of Ponyville. She inhaled deeply and let out an angry sigh. I know it was you, Pinky, she began lowly. It was you last night. I wasn't dreaming. I remembered the warmth and the feeling of some pony else in the room with me, and the buzzing. I know it was you. Her voice was beginning to rise. And you've broken physics before, Pinky, she shouted, biting her lip to calm herself down. And you did it again. I know you did. She finished throwing a small wooden box onto the ground in front of the headstone. It snapped open, sending a small wooden a small golden necklace flying towards the headstone. Silence. This means forever, Twilight nearly whispered, her voice shaking. Her eyes hadn't strayed from the ground below. But it wasn't forever. She put up her hoof against her head. Stupid. It could have been forever, but I ruined it. I could have stopped it. I could have heard it. And I came in, and I stopped it from falling. It wouldn't have been hard. I picked up heavier things. It didn't happen to you. It didn't need to happen to you. It could have happened when no pony was anywhere near it. She fell to her haunches, her voice breaking. But it did. And now you're gone. Silence. We could have had a life together, you and I. Twilight sniffled, smiling despite herself. A house to ourselves, a family. We could have grown old together, lived our lives in love. A sob. But no. The universe played a terrible joke on me. It took you away. Tears rolled down her cheeks freely, even though a thin smile was still playing on her lips. You've broken physics before, Pinky. Why won't you do it again? She leaned forward and hugged the headstone, leaning on it with the weight of her misery. Her sobs, some of the last she would give for her loved one, echoed around the light forest. It was probably about half an hour before her tears diminished, and she stood stiffly, collecting the small necklace and returning it to the box with her magic. What do you want, Applejack? Silence, and she shuffled shuffling of dry leaves and awkward movements. Applejack emerged from the copse of the trees behind Twilight. I'm sorry, Twi. I didn't mean to What I mean to say is... She paused. Twilight remained stoic, turned around to leave, not looking at the orange earth pony standing embarrassedly near her. However, to Twilight's surprise, Applejack didn't stay behind or move ahead. She ended up walking alongside her, silently. Twilight was touched, but also felt a degree of frustration towards her friend. Couldn't she see Twilight wanted to be alone? To Twilight's surprise, Applejack still walked alongside her as they passed the gates to Sweet Apple Acres. Twilight stopped, the box still held to her chest. Applejack, go home. Not until I make sure my best friend's okay, she replied quietly. I'm fine, AJ, just go. Twilight said with an undertone of exhaustion. She was more than ready for this emotionally awkwardness to be over. Without further warning, Applejack leaned over and threw her forelegs around Twilight, enveloping her in a true embrace. Twilight was shocked at first. She had been so desperate to leave her friend, at least for the time being. She thought being alone could help her, but she felt herself leaning into it, to her dismay. Just the emotion in this hug was just too much coming from some pony she knew who cared about her. Just the compassion she felt in Applejack. Too much. She felt that familiar tingle behind her eyes. A signal went off in her brain. No. Not now. Not in front of some pony else. Remember, Pinky will. Remember Pinky's will. Don't be sad. Be happy. Be happy. I'm sorry, Twi, Applejack whispered. That pushed her over the edge. Tears began falling down her cheeks, but she didn't feel the kind of terrible misery she had felt when the accident in her head, or the longing tears she felt when she was with Pinky's spirit, or whatever visitor it may have been the night before. She smiled and reached her forelegs back around Applejack, returning the hug. Thank you, AJ. Thank you so much. Not all tears have to be sad. And that was the story, A Visit by Emerald Flight. It was very touching, and it was very sad. I'm gonna stop the live stream for now. We will be back in about 10 minutes, I think. Yes, that seems appropriate. So, see you in 10.